The Oath and the Sun. In the sun-scorched hills of Canaan, a palpable fear clung to the air, thicker than the dust that swirled in the hot afternoon wind. The stories, carried on the trembling lips of refugees and the hushed whispers of merchants, painted a terrifying picture. The Israelites, a nation said to be forged in the crucible of divine fire and tempered in the vast, unforgiving wilderness, were on the march. Their God, Yahweh, was a deity of immense and terrifying power, a being who had cleaved the sea in two and toppled the armies of mighty kings. The ruins of Jericho and Ai stood as silent, smoking testaments to their relentless advance. For the inhabitants of Canaan, the future was a rapidly shrinking horizon, a gathering storm of conquest and annihilation. Nestled in the strategic highlands, the people of Jibon, a confederation of 4 cities, listened to these reports with a growing sense of dread. They were a pragmatic and shrewd people, their leaders known more for their cunning than their military prowess. They understood the grim reality of their situation. The Israelites, driven by a divine mandate to possess the land, were not a force to be reasoned with in the conventional sense. To stand and fight would be suicide. Their modest forces would be swept away like chaff in the wind. To flee would be to condemn themselves to a life of wandering and destitution, their culture and identity scattered to the 4 corners of the earth. The elders of Jibon gathered in the cool, subterranean chambers of their city, the flickering torchlight dancing across their worried faces, each brow furrowed with the weight of their people's fate. The debate was long and fraught with anxiety. They were trapped between the proverbial rock and a hard place, with the crushing weight of an impending invasion threatening to obliterate them. It was in this crucible of desperation that a plan, as audacious as it was deceptive, was forged. They would not meet the Israelites with swords and spears, but with guile and subterfuge. A few days later, a small, forlorn delegation made its way towards the Israelite encampment at Gilgal. They were a picture of utter exhaustion and destitution, a carefully crafted tableau of hardship. Their garments were tattered and frayed, their leather sandals worn thin and patched repeatedly. The wineskins slung over their shoulders were old and cracked, their surfaces brittle and crumbling. In their sacks, they carried bread that was dry, hard, and speckled with mold. Every detail was meticulously orchestrated to suggest a journey of immense length and arduousness. Brought before Joshua, the venerable and battle-hardened leader of Israel, and the assembled elders, the Jibonite spokesman, a man whose face was a roadmap of feigned weariness, bowed low. His voice, when he spoke, was raspy and laced with a convincing tremor. "We have come from a very distant country," he began, his words painting a picture of a long and perilous trek. "We have heard of the fame of your God, Yahweh, of the mighty deeds he performed in Egypt, and of your victories over the Amorite kings beyond the Jordan. The renown of your power has reached our far-off land, and our elders and all the inhabitants of our country compelled us to undertake this journey, to seek an alliance with you." He gestured dramatically towards their dilapidated provisions. "Look at our bread," he implored, holding up a piece of moldy crust. "It was warm from the oven on the day we set out, but now it is dry and crumbling. These wineskins, which were new when we filled them, are now split and useless. Our clothes and our sandals are worn out from the great length of the journey." The Israelite leaders listened intently, their initial suspicion warring with a growing sense of credulity. They examined the proffered evidence, the stale bread, the cracked wineskins, the tattered clothing. The performance was convincing, the details seemingly authentic. In an age of limited geographical knowledge, the idea of a delegation from a far-flung kingdom was not beyond the realm of possibility. It was a pivotal moment, a juncture where wisdom and discernment were paramount. Yet, in a critical oversight, the leaders of Israel leaned on their own understanding. They did not pause to consult the Lord, to seek divine guidance through the Urim and Thummim, the sacred instruments of priestly divination. They were swayed by the convincing narrative and the carefully fabricated evidence. Joshua, persuaded by the elaborate ruse, rose to his feet. "We will make a treaty of peace with you," he declared, his voice resonating with authority. "We will let you live." The elders of the assembly murmured their assent, and a solemn oath was sworn in the name of Yahweh. A covenant, binding and inviolable, was forged between the nation of Israel and the supposed sojourners from a distant land. The Gibeonites, through their audacious deception, had seemingly secured their survival. The truth, however, has a way of surfacing, often with uncomfortable speed. 3 days. That was all it took for the intricate web of lies to unravel. As the Israelite army continued its inexorable advance through the hill country, they came upon the cities of Gibon, Kephra, Beeroth, and Kiriath-Jearim. A chilling realization dawned upon them. These were not the cities of a foreign people, but the homes of the very men with whom they had just sworn a sacred oath. The distant country was, in fact, right under their noses. A wave of indignation swept through the Israelite camp. The people, feeling betrayed and foolish, turned their anger upon their leaders. "Why have you deceived us?" They railed against the Gibeonites, but their sharpest reproaches were reserved for Joshua and the elders. "You have made a covenant with the inhabitants of this land, the very people the Lord commanded us to utterly destroy. You have been tricked." The leaders found themselves in an untenable position. They had been gullible, to be sure, but the oath they had sworn was no trivial matter. An oath invoked in the name of the Lord God of Israel could not be summarily dismissed. Their word, once given, was an unbreakable bond. Joshua, his face a mask of grim frustration, summoned the Gibeonite leaders. The weight of his authority and his anger filled the space between them. "Why did you deceive us?" he demanded, his voice low and menacing. "Why did you lie to us, claiming to be from a distant country when you live in our very midst?" The Gibeonite spokesman, his earlier theatrics now replaced by a raw and desperate honesty, fell to his knees. "We did it because we were terrified for our lives," he confessed, his voice trembling with genuine fear. "We knew with certainty that the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you all this land and to destroy all who live in it. We saw death approaching, and in our desperation we devised this plan. Now here we are in your hands. Do with us as you see fit." Joshua and the elders were caught in a web of their own making. They could not, in good conscience, break their oath and annihilate the Gibeonites. To do so would bring dishonor upon the name of their God. Yet they could not allow such a brazen deception to go unpunished. A solution was crafted, a compromise that would uphold the sanctity of their oath while imposing a lasting consequence for the Gibeonites' deceit. Joshua, looking down at the prostrate leaders, delivered his verdict. "Because of this deception, you are now under a curse. You will never be freed from servitude. You and your descendants will be woodcutters and water carriers for the house of my God." And so it was that the Gibeonites, who had cleverly orchestrated their own survival, were bound to a life of perpetual service. They would hew the wood for the sacrificial fires and draw the water for the sacred rituals of the tabernacle, and later, the great temple in Jerusalem. Their deception had brought them life, but a life lived in the shadow of their cunning. The story, however, does not conclude with this judgment. The covenant born of deceit would soon be tested by fire and blood. When the neighboring Amorite kings, the rulers of Jerusalem, Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, and Eglon, heard that Gibon had capitulated and made a treaty with the Israelites, they were enraged. They viewed the Gibeonites as traitors, a weak link in the chain of Canaanite resistance. A powerful coalition was formed, their combined armies marching on Gibon with punitive intent. Faced with this new and formidable threat, the Gibeonites sent a frantic plea to Joshua at Gilgal. "Do not abandon your servants. Come quickly and save us. All the Amorite kings of the hill country have joined forces against us." This was the ultimate test of the covenant. Would Joshua honor an agreement that had been secured through trickery? Would he risk the lives of his men to save a people who had so thoroughly duped him? For Joshua, the path was clear. An oath was an oath, regardless of the circumstances of its inception. He immediately mustered his finest warriors, the seasoned veterans of his campaigns, and embarked on a grueling, all-night march from the plains of Gilgal up into the rugged hill country. As the first rays of dawn painted the eastern sky, the Israelite army descended upon the unsuspecting Amorite forces at Gibeon. The surprise was absolute. Thrown into a state of panic and confusion, the Amorite armies broke ranks and fled in disarray. And then something extraordinary occurred. As the defeated Amorites scrambled down the mountain pass of Beit Horon, the heavens themselves seemed to join the fray. A furious hailstorm, with stones of ice of incredible size, rained down upon the fleeing soldiers. The biblical account states that more were killed by the hailstones than by the swords of the Israelites. In the midst of the raging battle, with the enemy in full retreat but the daylight beginning to fade, Joshua, filled with a divine fervor, cried out in a voice that carried across the battlefield, a prayer of audacious faith. "Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and you, moon, over the valley of Ajalon." In a moment that would be recounted for generations, the natural order of the cosmos seemed to pause. The sun remained in the midst of the sky, its light prolonging the day, until the nation of Israel had achieved a complete and decisive victory. The 5 Amorite kings were captured and executed, their armies shattered. The Gibeonites were saved. The covenant, forged in the fires of deception, had been honored by Israel and miraculously vindicated by God. For their part, the Gibeonites faithfully upheld their end of the bargain, serving as woodcutters and water carriers for the house of the Lord for centuries to come. The tale of the Gibeonite deception is a rich and complex narrative, a testament to the ingenuity born of desperation and the unyielding weight of a solemn oath. It is a story that underscores the importance of integrity and the consequences of both deceit and gullibility. But perhaps most profoundly, it offers a glimpse into the mysterious workings of divine providence, a God who can weave even the tangled threads of human cunning and error into the grand tapestry of his unfolding purposes. The Gibeonites, through their clever and desperate ruse, not only preserved their own existence, but were unexpectedly grafted into the ongoing saga of Israel and its powerful, enigmatic God. The vineyard of Naboth. In the heart of the kingdom of Israel in the verdant Jezreel Valley lived a man named Naboth. He was not a prince or a mighty warrior, but a man of the land, his hands calloused from the soil that had sustained his family for generations. His pride and joy was his vineyard, a plot of fertile ground inherited from his ancestors, its vines heavy with sweet, purple grapes. The vineyard was more than just his livelihood. It was his birthright, a sacred trust passed down through the ages, a tangible link to his heritage and his God. This vineyard happened to be situated right next to the winter palace of the most powerful man in the kingdom, Ahab, king of Israel. King Ahab was a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. He ruled with a certain flair, building opulent cities of ivory and engaging in grand political alliances. Yet, for all his power and possessions, his gaze often fell upon Naboth's humble vineyard. It was so conveniently located, so perfectly placed to be converted into a royal herb garden for the palace. The neat rows of vines, so precious to Naboth, became an object of fixation, a constant, nagging desire in the king's heart. One day, unable to contain his craving any longer, Ahab approached Naboth. He put on a veneer of royal magnanimity, his voice smooth and reasonable. "Naboth," the king began, "give me your vineyard. It is so close to my palace and I wish to have it for a vegetable garden. In exchange, I will give you a better vineyard, a finer one in any location you choose. Or, if you prefer, I will pay you its worth in silver. Whatever the price, I will meet it." To Ahab, it was a simple, logical transaction. He saw land and value, but Naboth saw something more. He saw the legacy of his fathers, the commandment of the Lord that ancestral land was not to be sold or permanently transferred from the family to whom it was allotted. Naboth stood his ground, his voice respectful but firm. "The Lord forbid," he answered, his words carrying the weight of sacred duty. "The Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers." The king was stunned. It was an answer he was not used to hearing. Denied, refused. His offer, which he considered more than generous, had been thrown back in his face. Ahab, a man who commanded armies and held the power of life and death, was powerless to acquire this small patch of earth. He returned to his palace not with a kingly rage, but with a sullen, childish resentment. He threw himself upon his bed, turned his face to the wall, and refused to eat. The great king of Israel was sulking. It was in this pathetic state that his wife, Queen Jezebel, found him. Jezebel was not a daughter of Israel. She was a Phoenician princess, a worshiper of the storm god Baal, and a woman of iron will and ruthless ambition. She saw her husband's dejection and met it with contempt. "Is this how the king of Israel acts?" she scoffed. "Get up, eat something. Why are you so depressed? Tell me what troubles you." Ahab recounted the story, his voice thick with self-pity. "Because I spoke to Naboth the Jezreelite," he whined. "I told him, 'Sell me your vineyard, or if you prefer, I will give you another vineyard in its place.' But he answered, 'I will not give you the inheritance of my fathers.'" Jezebel listened, her eyes narrowing. She could not comprehend the religious scruples of Naboth or the pathetic inaction of her husband. To her, power was absolute. If you wanted something, you took it. A wicked smile played on her lips. "Are you not the king of Israel?" she said, her voice a silken promise of venom. "Arise and eat, cheer up. I will get you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite." Leaving her pouting husband, Jezebel moved with chilling efficiency. She took the king's seal, the symbol of his authority, and began to write letters in his name. The letters were addressed to the elders and nobles of Naboth's city, the very men who were supposed to be the guardians of justice. The queen's instructions were precise and diabolical. "Proclaim a day of fasting," the letters read. "Seat Naboth in a place of honor among the people. But you are to hire 2 scoundrels to sit opposite him and testify against him, saying, 'You have cursed both God and the king.' Then take him out and stone him to death." The elders and nobles of Jezreel, upon receiving the royal command, did not question it. Whether from fear of the queen, a desire for royal favor, or a simple corruption of their own hearts, they obeyed without protest. The machinery of injustice, greased by power, began to turn. A public fast was declared, a solemn occasion that lent a false air of gravity to the proceedings. Naboth, an honorable man in his community, was given a prominent seat, unaware of the sinister plot swirling around him. As instructed, 2 men, their faces shadowed by their lies, were brought forward. They pointed an accusing finger at Naboth. "This man, Naboth," they declared in loud, false voices, "has cursed God and the king." The charge was blasphemy and treason, the 2 most heinous crimes imaginable. There was no trial, no defense, no questioning of the witnesses. The verdict was instantaneous. A horrified gasp rippled through the crowd, quickly turning into a mob's fury. Naboth was dragged outside the city walls, the place of execution, and a torrent of stones rained down upon him, extinguishing the life of an innocent man. Once the deed was done, the elders sent a message back to the queen. Naboth has been stoned and is dead. Jezebel went to her husband. "Get up," she said, her voice triumphant. "Take possession of the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite, the one he refused to sell you. He is no longer alive, but dead." Ahab's sullenness vanished. The moral inconvenience of Naboth's refusal had been removed. Without questioning the means, he eagerly accepted the result. He arose and went down to the vineyard of Naboth, the object of his obsession, to finally claim it as his own. As Ahab walked among the vines, perhaps already planning where his precious herbs would grow, he was not alone. The Lord had witnessed the entire, sordid affair. The cry of innocent blood had risen from the soil of the vineyard and reached the heavens. The word of the Lord came to the most feared man in Israel, Elijah the Tishbite, a prophet as wild and untamed as the wilderness from which he often emerged. Clad in animal skins, his presence was a rebuke to the luxury and corruption of the court. He was the conscience of Israel, a living embodiment of God's fiery justice. "Go down to meet Ahab king of Israel, who is in Samaria," the Lord commanded Elijah. "He is now in Naboth's vineyard where he has gone to take possession of it. Say to him, 'This is what the Lord says. Have you not murdered a man and seized his property?' Then say to him, 'This is what the Lord says. In the place where dogs licked up Naboth's blood, dogs will lick up your blood, yes, yours." Elijah obeyed. He confronted Ahab in the midst of the stolen vineyard. The king, startled, looked up and saw his nemesis. "So you have found me, my enemy," Ahab spat. Elijah's eyes burned with divine authority. "I have found you," he thundered, "because you have sold yourself to do evil in the sight of the Lord." The prophet then delivered the terrible judgment from God. He foretold the utter destruction of Ahab's royal line. He spoke of a disaster so complete that none of his male descendants would survive. And then, he delivered a specific and gruesome prophecy concerning the architect of the crime, Queen Jezebel. "And of Jezebel the Lord says, 'Dogs will devour Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel.'" The prophecy was a death sentence, not just for Ahab and his queen, but for their entire legacy. In the very place where their greed had culminated in murder, their own blood would be spilled and desecrated. The story of Naboth's vineyard became a stark and enduring lesson that no one, not even a king, stands above the justice of God, and that the earth itself bears witness to the crimes of humanity. Of course, this is a brief but haunting story from the time of King David. It is not a tale of heroic battles or cunning assassinations, but a quiet, powerful testament to a mother's love and fierce devotion. Rizpah's Vigil. A famine, gaunt and relentless, held the kingdom of Israel in its grip for 3 consecutive years. The sky was like brass, the earth like iron. The fields lay barren, and the faces of King David's people grew hollow with hunger and despair. This was no ordinary drought. It felt like a judgment, a deep sickness in the land itself. Troubled, David went before the Lord to seek an answer. "Why?" he asked. "Why has the land turned against us?" The answer that came back was an echo from a dark chapter in Israel's past. "It is on account of Saul," the Lord said, "and his blood-stained house, because he put the Gibeonites to death." David's mind raced back. Years earlier, long before his own reign, Israel's first king, Saul, in a fit of misguided zeal, had sought to annihilate the Gibeonites. This was a flagrant violation of a sacred oath made generations before, when Joshua and the leaders of Israel had sworn to protect them. The Gibeonites had been tricked into that covenant, but the oath, sworn in God's name, was unbreakable. Saul had broken it, and the land was now crying out under the weight of that unexpiated sin. David knew he had to make things right. He summoned the elders of the Gibeonites, the descendants of those Saul had wronged. "What shall I do for you?" David asked them, his voice heavy with the burden of his predecessor's crime. "How can I make atonement so that you may bless the inheritance of the Lord and this famine may end?" The Gibeonites' response was not for silver or gold. Their hurt was too deep for monetary payment. "The man who consumed us and plotted against us to destroy us, so that we should have no place in all the territory of Israel," they said. "Let 7 of his male descendants be given to us to be executed and exposed before the Lord at Gibeah of Saul." It was a grim request, a demand for blood justice, rooted in the ancient laws of retribution. David, bound to make amends, agreed. His heart was heavy as he searched for the descendants of Saul. He spared Mephibosheth, the son of his beloved friend Jonathan, because of the oath he had sworn to him. But he took the 2 sons of Rizpah, Saul's concubine, whose names were Armoni and Mephibosheth. He also took the 5 sons of Saul's daughter Merab. 7 men, grandsons of the king who had committed the original crime, were chosen as the sacrifice. They were taken to a sacred hill and executed. Their bodies were not buried but left exposed on the hillside, a stark and terrible offering to appease the heavens, left to the mercy of the elements and the beasts of the field. The grim transaction was complete. The kingdom could now hope for rain. The living could move on. But one person could not. Rizpah, the mother of 2 of the slain men, watched the proceedings with a heart shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. She had been a king's consort, a woman of status, but now she was just a mother whose sons had been taken from her to pay for a crime they did not commit. As their bodies were left on the hill at the beginning of the barley harvest, a profound and defiant resolve took root in her soul. She would not abandon her boys. She took sackcloth, the rough fabric of mourning, and spread it for herself on a rock, and there she began her vigil. As the days grew hot, she stayed, a solitary, unmoving figure on the desolate hill. When the vultures and eagles circled overhead, descending to feast on the dead, she was there, a fierce guardian, beating them away with a staff or a cloth. When the sun went down and the cold night crept in, she remained. When the jackals and hyenas, drawn by the scent of death, slunk out of the darkness, she was there, a sentinel in the blackness, refusing to let her sons' bodies be dishonored. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months. The barley harvest came and went, followed by the wheat harvest. Rizpah stayed. Her silent, stubborn grief became a spectacle. Travelers on the road would have seen her, a lone woman keeping watch over the decaying bodies, her form gaunt, her face etched with sorrow, but her purpose unwavering. Her vigil was a shocking, public act of maternal love, a protest against the brutal customs of the age, and a testament to the dignity of the dead. News of Rizpah's extraordinary act finally reached King David. He was deeply moved by the story, by the quiet, relentless power of this mother's devotion. Her vigil was a piercing rebuke. It highlighted a profound failure in his own actions. He had authorized the killing to bring justice and healing to the land, but he had neglected the basic human duty of honoring the dead. The sight of Rizpah's loyalty shamed him. Stirred to action by her example, David did something he should have done long ago. He traveled to Jabesh-Gilead, where the bones of King Saul and his son Jonathan had been interred after they fell in battle. He retrieved their remains with honor. Then he went to the hill of Gibeah and gathered the bones of the 7 men who had been executed, the very men Rizpah had so faithfully guarded. He gave them all a proper royal burial, laying them to rest together in the tomb of Kish, Saul's father. It was an act of national reconciliation, a final healing of the wounds that had plagued his kingdom. And only then, after Rizpah's vigil had shamed a king into action, and the dead were finally shown the honor they were due, did God hear the prayers of the people. The brassy skies softened, the clouds gathered, and the long-awaited rains came at last to heal the thirsty land. Of course, this story is from the New Testament and is not a tale of kings or battles, but a quiet, life-changing conversation that took place on a hot afternoon by a historic well. The woman at the well. The sun beat down on the dusty Samaritan hills, baking the earth and sending shimmering waves of heat rising from the road. It was midday, the hour when sensible people sought shade and stillness, letting the worst of the heat pass. Jesus, traveling with his disciples from Judea to Galilee, was weary from the journey. While his disciples went into the nearby town of Sychar to buy food, he sat down to rest by a place of deep historical significance, Jacob's well. It was a place heavy with the memory of the great patriarch, its cool depths having provided water for generations. As he sat there, a solitary figure approached. It was a Samaritan woman coming to draw water. Her presence at the well at this hour was unusual. Women typically came to draw water in the cool of the morning or evening, a time of social gathering and conversation. To come alone, in the full heat of the noon sun, suggested a woman who was an outcast, one who actively avoided the company and judgment of the other women in her town. She came to the well, focused on her task, likely expecting to be ignored. But the Jewish man sitting there spoke to her. "Will you give me a drink?" Jesus asked. The woman stopped, startled. Everything about his request was wrong. He was a Jew. She was a Samaritan, two peoples separated by centuries of bitter religious and ethnic animosity. Jews believed the Samaritans had corrupted the pure worship of God. Samaritans had their own holy mountain and their own version of the sacred texts. They were rivals, avoiding contact whenever possible. Furthermore, he was a man, a rabbi by his appearance, and she was a woman he did not know. For him to speak to her, a Samaritan woman alone, was a shocking breach of social custom. She couldn't hide her surprise. "You are a Jew and I am a Samaritan woman," she said, her tone a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. "How can you ask me for a drink?" Jesus looked at her, his gaze gentle but piercing, seeing past the layers of social and religious division. "If you knew the gift of God," he answered, "and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water." His reply was enigmatic, shifting the conversation from the physical to the spiritual. The woman was intrigued but confused. She looked at him, then at the deep well. "Sir," she said, respectfully but with a touch of skepticism, "you have nothing to draw with and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock?" "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again," Jesus said, his voice carrying a new authority. "But whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman was captivated. His words spoke to a deep, unnamed thirst within her soul. She didn't fully understand what he meant by eternal life, but the promise of quenching a thirst so deep it would never return was irresistible. Her life had been a series of disappointments, a search for fulfillment in all the wrong places. "Sir," she said, her voice now earnest, "give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." Jesus' next words seemed to come from nowhere, a sudden and jarring shift in the conversation. "Go, call your husband and come back." The woman's face fell. The question pierced through her defenses, touching the very source of her shame, the reason she came to the well at noon. "I have no husband," she replied, her answer terse and evasive. "You are right when you say you have no husband," Jesus said softly, but with undeniable knowledge. "The fact is, You have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true." The woman was stunned into silence. This stranger, this Jewish man, had just laid bare the entire sordid, painful history of her life. He knew her secret shame. He wasn't guessing, he knew. This was not an ordinary man. "Sir," she whispered, her skepticism melting away into awe, "I can see that you are a prophet." Immediately, she did what people often do when confronted with an uncomfortable spiritual truth. She changed the subject to religion. She pointed toward the mountain looming behind them. "Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain," she said, raising the ancient argument between their peoples. "But you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." Jesus didn't take the bait. He didn't engage in the centuries-old debate. Instead, he answered her deeper question, the one about where God could truly be found. "Woman," he said, "believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is Spirit, and his worshipers must worship in the Spirit and in truth." His words transcended all the old arguments. Worship wasn't about a place, a mountain, or a temple. It was about the state of the human heart, an authentic connection with God that was not confined by geography or ritual. The woman was overwhelmed, piecing everything together. The talk of living water, his knowledge of her past, his profound words about God. There was only one person who could be, the one her people had been waiting for. "I know that Messiah is coming," she said, almost to herself. "When he comes, he will explain everything to us." Then Jesus looked at her and said the words that would change her life forever. "I, the one speaking to you, I am he." At that exact moment, his disciples returned from the town. They were shocked to find him talking to a Samaritan woman, but none of them dared to question him. The spell was broken. The woman, in her astonishment and newfound joy, left her water jar sitting by the well, the very reason for her journey completely forgotten. She ran back to her town, her heart overflowing. She, the outcast who avoided people, became the first evangelist to her community. "Come, see a man who told me everything I ever did," she cried out to the townspeople who had shunned her. Could this be the Messiah? Her testimony, so personal and authentic, was electrifying. The townspeople, intrigued by the dramatic change in this woman they all knew, streamed out of Sychar and went to the well to see Jesus for themselves. Because of a single conversation on a hot afternoon, an entire Samaritan town came to believe, not just because of the woman's story, but because they heard him for themselves and knew that he was truly the Savior of the world. The unbelievable answer. The mood in Jerusalem was grim. King Herod Agrippa I, a grandson of the Herod who had tried to kill the infant Jesus, had discovered a brutally effective way to win favor with the people and the religious leaders: persecute the fledgling church. He had recently seized James, the brother of John and one of Jesus's inner circle, and had him executed by the sword. The public approval was resounding. Emboldened by this success, Herod laid his hands on the movement's most prominent leader, Simon Peter. Peter, the Rock, the fiery preacher who had stood up on the day of Pentecost, was arrested and thrown into the maximum security wing of Jerusalem's prison. Herod wasn't taking any chances. He assigned 4 squads of 4 soldiers each, a total of 16 men to guard him around the clock. Peter was bound with 2 chains and made to sleep between 2 soldiers, while sentries stood watch at the prison door. Herod's plan was to keep him securely locked away until after the Passover festival, at which point he would stage a public trial and, undoubtedly, another execution. For the church, it was a devastating blow. Their leader was in chains, his death seemingly inevitable. They could not storm the prison or appeal to the king. They had only one weapon left to them. So, throughout the city, in small, hidden gatherings, the believers prayed. They didn't just pray, they prayed earnestly, fervently, without ceasing. They prayed for a miracle. One such prayer meeting was held in the house of a woman named Mary, the mother of John Mark, who would later write the Gospel of Mark. Her home was large, a central hub for the Jerusalem church. Night after night, they gathered there, their voices a low, desperate hum, pleading with God for Peter's life. The night before Peter's scheduled trial arrived, all hope seemed lost. In his cell, Peter was not packing or panicking. He was asleep, chained between his two guards. He had done all he could do. The rest was in God's hands. Suddenly, the dark, stifling cell was filled with a blinding light. An angel of the Lord appeared. The guards, inexplicably, remained asleep, oblivious. The angel struck Peter on the side to wake him up. "Quick, get up," the angel urged. As Peter sat up, the heavy iron chains, which a moment before had bound his wrists to the soldiers, simply fell away as if they were made of thread. "Put on your clothes and sandals," the angel commanded. Peter, still dazed and likely thinking he was having a vivid dream or a vision, obeyed. "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me," the angel said. Peter followed him out of the cell. They walked past the first guard post and then the second. The sentries stood like statues, seeing nothing. They came to the main iron gate that led out to the city street. This was the final, impassable barrier. As they approached, the massive gate swung open for them of its own accord. They walked out into the cool night air and down the length of one street. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, the angel was gone. Peter stood alone in the silent, sleeping street. The cold night air on his face finally shocked him back to full consciousness. This wasn't a dream. The chains were gone. The prison was behind him. He was free. "Now I know for certain," he whispered to himself in awe. "The Lord has sent his angel and rescued me from Herod's clutches and from everything the Jewish people were anticipating." His first thought was of his friends. He knew where they would be. He made his way through the familiar, winding alleys to the house of Mary. He approached the outer gate and knocked. Inside, the prayer meeting was still going on. Hearing the knock, a servant girl named Rhoda went to the door to answer. "Who is it?" she called out. "It's Peter," came the reply. Rhoda recognized his voice instantly. In her overwhelming joy and excitement, she did something utterly illogical. She completely forgot to open the gate. She turned and ran back inside to the prayer meeting, leaving Peter standing outside in the street. "Peter is at the gate," she exclaimed, bursting into the room. The praying believers stopped and stared at her. They looked at her not with joy, but with pitying concern. They had been praying for Peter's release, but the reality of it was too much to believe. "You're out of your mind," they told her. "No, it's true, it's really him," she insisted. "It must be his angel," they concluded, unable to fathom the actual miracle they had been begging God to perform. Meanwhile, Peter, still standing outside, kept on knocking, perhaps a little more urgently now. Finally, the others went to the gate themselves. They drew back the bolt and opened it, and there he was. They stared at him, dumbfounded, caught between prayer and disbelief. Peter motioned with his hand for them to be quiet, quickly described how the Lord had miraculously brought him out of prison, and then, telling them to report the news to James, the brother of Jesus and new leader of the Jerusalem church. And the others, he slipped away into the night before Herod's soldiers could begin their search. The next morning, the prison was in an uproar. There was no small commotion among the soldiers when they awoke to find their prisoner gone, the cell still locked, and the chains lying empty on the floor. Herod, furious and humiliated, interrogated the guards. When they could provide no explanation, he had them executed. But the king's power had been broken. The man he had slated for death was free, and the church he had tried to intimidate was filled with a fresh wave of courage and an unforgettable story of how God answered their prayers, even when they didn't have enough faith to believe the answer was knocking at their own front door. This story is from the turbulent era of the Judges, a time when Israel repeatedly forgot its God and fell into ruin. It's the story of a man who was hiding from his enemies but was found by God, a man who led an army that was both too big and just the right size. The army of 300. For 7 years, the Israelites lived in a state of perpetual terror. They had turned their backs on God, and in turn, their prosperity had vanished, devoured by the Midianites. The Midianites, along with their allies the Amalekites and other eastern peoples, were like a plague of locusts. Every year at harvest time, they would sweep across the Jordan River on their camels, a horde so vast they were impossible to count. They swarmed through the land and consumed everything: the wheat, the barley, the sheep, the oxen. They left nothing behind, stripping the land bare and driving the Israelites into poverty and starvation. To survive, the Israelites fled to the mountains, hiding in caves, dens, and strongholds. In the village of Ophrah, a young man named Gideon, son of Joash, was trying to salvage what little he could of his family's harvest. But he wasn't thrashing wheat out in the open on a windy hilltop where the chaff could blow away. He was down in a winepress, a pit dug into the ground, beating out the grain in secret, hidden from the watchful eyes of any passing Midianite raiders. Every swing of his flail was muffled by the earthen walls, every moment fraught with the fear of discovery. Suddenly he was not alone. A figure was sitting there beneath the terebinth tree. "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior," the stranger said. Gideon, startled and covered in the dust of his secret labor, looked up. His reply was not one of faith, but of bitter complaint. "Pardon me, my lord," he said, his voice laced with the sarcasm of a man who felt abandoned. "But if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian." The stranger, an angel of the Lord, looked at him, and his voice was filled with authority. "Go in the strength you have and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Am I not sending you?" Gideon was stunned. Strength? What strength? He saw only his own weakness, his own fear. "Pardon me, my lord," he stammered, "but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." "I will be with you," the Lord answered him, "and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive." This promise seemed impossible. Gideon, still skeptical, asked for a sign. He prepared a meal of a young goat and unleavened bread. The angel instructed him to place the meat and the bread on a rock and pour the broth over it. When he had done so, the angel touched the offering with the tip of his staff. Fire flared from the rock, consuming the entire meal in an instant. The angel then vanished. Trembling, Gideon knew he had been in the presence of God. That night, Gideon's faith was put to its first test. God commanded him to tear down his own father's altar to the false god Baal and the sacred Asherah pole beside it. In its place, he was to build a proper altar to the Lord and sacrifice one of his father's bulls. Gideon was terrified, not of the Midianites, but of his own family and the townspeople. So he did it under the cover of darkness. The next morning, the town was in an uproar, demanding the head of whoever had desecrated their shrine. But Gideon's father, Joash, stood up for him. "Are you going to plead Baal's case?" he challenged the mob. "If he is a god, let him contend for himself." Word of Gideon's act spread. As the Midianite armies gathered once more in the valley of Jezreel, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon. He blew a trumpet, and the men of his clan and the surrounding tribes began to rally to him. An army was forming, but Gideon's faith still wavered. He needed one more sign. "If you will save Israel by my hand as you have promised," he prayed, "look, I will place a wool fleece on the thrashing floor. If there is dew only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I will know." The next morning it was so. He wrung a full bowl of water from the fleece while the ground around it was bone dry. But still a sliver of doubt remained. "Do not be angry with me," he pleaded. "Let me make just one more request. This time make the fleece dry and let the ground be covered with dew." The next morning God did that too. The fleece was dry and the ground was wet. Gideon had no more room for doubt. He now stood at the head of an army of 32,000 men, camped near the massive Midianite force. But God had another surprise. "You have too many men," the Lord told him. "I cannot deliver Midian into their hands, or Israel would boast against me. My own strength has saved me." God instructed Gideon to make an announcement. "Anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead." Gideon obeyed. 22,000 men turned and walked away, leaving him with only 10,000. Gideon looked at his diminished force. 10,000 against a horde that was as thick as sand on the seashore. But God's test was not over. "There are still too many men," the Lord said. "Take them down to the water, and I will thin them out for you there." Gideon led the men to a spring. God instructed him, "Separate those who lap the water with their tongues as a dog laps from those who kneel down to drink." Most of the men knelt, burying their faces in the water to drink their fill. But a small group, just 300, remained alert. They simply cupped the water in their hands and lapped it, their eyes still scanning the horizon. "With the 300 men that lapped," the Lord said to Gideon, "I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the others go home." Gideon was left with an army that was, by any military standard, a joke. 300 men. But he was about to learn that with God, the odds are irrelevant. That night, God sent him on a final reconnaissance mission into the enemy camp. He and his servant Purah crept down into the valley and overheard 2 Midianite soldiers talking. "I had a dream," one said. "A round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp. It struck a tent with such force that the tent collapsed." "This can be nothing else," his friend replied, his voice trembling, "than the sword of Gideon son of Joash, the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands." Hearing this, Gideon's last ounce of fear vanished. He worshipped God, returned to his men, and laid out his audacious plan. He gave each of his 300 men a trumpet, an empty clay jar, and a torch to be placed inside the jar. He divided them into 3 companies, and they crept to the edge of the Midianite camp in the middle of the night, surrounding it. On Gideon's signal, a shattering noise broke the stillness. All 300 men smashed their jars, revealing the blazing torches. They blew their trumpets with all their might and shouted the battle cry, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." The effect was one of utter chaos and terror. The sleeping Midianites awoke to the sight of blazing lights and the sound of trumpets coming from every direction. They believed they were surrounded by a massive army. In the darkness and confusion, they turned on each other, shouting and screaming, cutting down their own comrades as they tried to flee. The massive army defeated itself. Gideon's 300 men simply held their positions and watched the hand of God at work. As the terrified Midianites ran for their lives, their great invasion ending in a panicked, self-inflicted slaughter. This is one of the most painful and poignant stories in the Bible. It is not a story of armies or kings, but a raw, living parable of love, betrayal, and a devotion so relentless it defies all human logic. It is the story of the prophet Hosea, the unfaithful bride. In the northern kingdom of Israel, during the reign of King Jeroboam II, the nation was rotting from the inside out. On the surface, there was a veneer of prosperity and power, but beneath it, the society was rife with corruption. The wealthy oppressed the poor, justice was for sale, and the worship of God had been grotesquely mingled with the sensual, idolatrous rites of the Canaanite Baals. The people had, in essence, been unfaithful to the God who had delivered them, chasing after other gods as a lover chases after illicit partners. Into this world came the word of the Lord to a young prophet named Hosea. God's first command to him was not to preach a sermon or to prophesy against a king. It was something far more personal, more shocking, and more heartrending. "Go," the Lord said, "and take to yourself a wife of whoredom and have children of whoredom, for the land commits great whoredom by forsaking the Lord." It was a command that must have felt like a dagger to the heart. Hosea, a man of God, was being asked to bind his life and his heart to a woman who would be unfaithful to him. His own marriage was to become a living, breathing sermon. His personal pain would mirror God's own pain over Israel's spiritual adultery. Obedient, though surely with a heavy heart, Hosea went and married a woman named Gomer. They had a son, and God instructed Hosea on what to name him. "Call his name Jezreel," the Lord said, "for in a little while I will punish the house of Jehu for the blood of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel." The child's name was a living prophecy of a coming judgment, a reminder of a past massacre that would soon be answered with a national collapse. But Gomer's nature, as God had foretold, could not be contained by the vows of marriage. She left Hosea and was unfaithful, yet she returned and she conceived again. This time it was a daughter. Again, God provided the name, a name that deepened the prophetic sorrow. "Call her name Lo-Ruhamah," God said, which means no mercy, for I will no more have mercy on the house of Israel. Hosea looked at his daughter, a child he loved, and had to call her by a name that promised abandonment. Every time he would call for her, he would be reminded of God's hardening heart toward a people who refused to return to him. Gomer's infidelity continued. After weaning no mercy, she had another son. The prophetic name for this child was the bleakest of all. "Call his name Lo-Ammi," God commanded, which means not my people, for you are not my people and I am not your God. The family of Hosea was a portrait of national tragedy. His wife was unfaithful. His first son was named for judgment. His daughter was named No Mercy. His second son was named Not My People. Hosea's home life was a constant, agonizing sermon of rejection and heartbreak, a reflection of the broken covenant between Israel and its God. Eventually, Gomer left for good. She descended fully into the life that had always called to her, chasing after her lovers, who she believed gave her the bread, water, wool, and flax that in reality came from her own husband's provision. She sank deeper and deeper into depravity, trading her dignity for fleeting pleasures, until she found herself with nothing. The lovers who had promised her so much abandoned her, and she ended up a slave, sold and owned, stripped of all freedom and worth. She had become a shell of the woman Hosea had married. Hosea could have, and by any human standard should have, let her go. He had every right to cast her aside, to forget the shame and pain she had caused him. But then the word of the Lord came to him again, with a command that was even more radical than the first. "Go again," the Lord said. "Love a woman who is loved by another man and is an adulteress, even as the Lord loves the children of Israel, though they turn to other gods." God was asking Hosea not just to marry a promiscuous woman, but to now go and actively pursue his own unfaithful wife, to find her in her degradation and buy her back. He was to redeem her. So Hosea went. He found Gomer likely on an auction block, disgraced and for sale. He looked at the woman who had broken his heart, the mother of his children, and instead of scorn, he showed her redemptive love. He paid the price for her. So I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and a homer and a lethech of barley, Hosea records, paying the full price of a common slave. He brought her home, but their reunion was not one of instant romance. It was the beginning of a stark and difficult restoration. "You must dwell as mine for many days," he told her, laying out the terms of her return. "You shall not play the whore, and you shall not be for another man, so I will also be for you." It was a period of cleansing, of waiting, a time for her to learn again what it meant to belong to one man, to be faithful. And in this act, Hosea's living sermon reached its stunning climax. Just as he bought back his own wife from slavery, so God promised that one day, after a long period of judgment and discipline, a time when Israel would be without a king, a prince, or a sacrifice, he would redeem his unfaithful people. The story of Hosea and Gomer ends with this staggering promise of hope born from unimaginable pain, that the God who felt the sharp sting of betrayal would, out of the depths of his own relentless, incomprehensible love, one day buy back his bride and love her again. This story comes from a time of exile, when the people of Judah were captives in the mighty empire of Babylon. It is a tale of 3 young men who, faced with an impossible choice, stood firm in their faith, defying the most powerful man on earth, the Golden King and the fiery furnace. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon was a man of colossal ego and immense power. His kingdom stretched across the known world, and his will was law. In the plains of Dura, near the great city of Babylon, he erected a monument to his own grandeur, a gleaming golden statue, 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. It towered over the flat landscape, a dazzling testament to the king's authority. When the statue was complete, Nebuchadnezzar commanded every high-ranking official in his empire to attend its dedication. Satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, all the rulers of the provinces were summoned. They gathered before the golden image, a vast sea of officials representing the conquered peoples of the empire. A royal herald stepped forward, his voice booming across the plain. "This is what you are commanded to do, O peoples, nations, and men of every language. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." The command was absolute. This was not just a dedication. It was a loyalty test, a demand for complete submission to the king's authority, both political and spiritual. Among the gathered officials were 3 young Hebrew men who had been carried into exile from Judah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They had distinguished themselves in the king's service through their wisdom and integrity, but their ultimate allegiance was not to Nebuchadnezzar. It was to the God of Israel, whose law strictly forbade the worship of any graven image. As the royal orchestra struck the first chord, a wave of sound washed over the plain, and as one, the thousands of officials prostrated themselves, their faces pressed to the dust before the shimmering golden statue. But 3 men remained standing. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood tall, their defiance a stark and silent rebuke to the king's command. Their refusal did not go unnoticed. Certain astrologers and officials, jealous of the Hebrews' favored position in the court, rushed to the king. "O king, live forever," they began with fawning praise. You have issued a decree that everyone must fall down and worship the golden image. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. Nebuchadnezzar flew into a furious rage. His authority had been publicly challenged. He commanded that the three men be brought before him at once. They were dragged to the throne, the fury of the world's most powerful man radiating towards them. Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? He demanded, giving them one last chance. Now when you hear the sound of the music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? The three friends stood before the raging king, their faces calm, their voices steady. Their response has echoed through the centuries as a profound statement of faith. O Nebuchadnezzar, they replied, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. Then they added the crucial, unwavering testament to their faith. But even if he does not, they continued, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Their faith was not a bargain. It was not contingent on rescue. Their obedience to God was absolute, regardless of the outcome. The king's face contorted with rage. He was so furious that he ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than usual. The flames roared, licking out from the opening, so hot that the air itself seemed to shimmer. He commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the fire. The soldiers bound the three men, still fully clothed in their robes and turbans, and dragged them to the mouth of the furnace. The heat was so intense that the flames leaped out and killed the powerful soldiers who were throwing them in. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego fell, bound, into the heart of the inferno. Nebuchadnezzar, watching from a safe distance, leaned forward, expecting to see them instantly incinerated. But what he saw made him leap to his feet in utter astonishment. His voice was a mixture of terror and awe. Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire? He cried out to his advisors. Certainly, your majesty, they replied. Look, he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at the furnace. I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods. The king scrambled as close as he could to the opening of the blazing furnace. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out. Come here, he called. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego walked out of the fire. The crowd of officials pressed in, staring in stunned silence. Not a hair on their heads was singed. Their robes were not scorched. There was not even the smell of smoke about them. Humbled and awestruck, Nebuchadnezzar was a changed man. Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, he declared to the entire assembly. He has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. The king immediately issued a new decree. Anyone of any people or nation who spoke a word against the God of these 3 men would be torn limb from limb. The golden statue stood forgotten. That day, on the plains of Dura, the entire leadership of the Babylonian Empire learned that while the king's power was great, there was a greater power still, the God who could walk with his people through the fire. The chariot on the desert road. The early church was exploding with energy. Philip, one of the 7 men chosen to serve the church in Jerusalem, had become a powerful evangelist. He had just led a great revival in the city of Samaria, a place long considered hostile territory by the Jews. Miracles were performed, many people were healed, and for the first time the Samaritans joyfully received the message of Jesus. Philip was at the very center of a thriving, successful ministry. It was at this high point that an angel of the Lord came to him with a strange and perplexing command. Go south to the road, the desert road, that goes down from Jerusalem to Gaza. It made no sense. He was to leave a flourishing revival in a packed city and go to a deserted, barren road in the middle of nowhere. It was a path known for being lonely and dangerous. There was no strategic reason to go there, no crowd to preach to. It was an assignment built entirely on trust. Without questioning, Philip obeyed. He got up and went. Meanwhile, on that very road, a chariot was making its slow, stately way back towards Africa. Inside was a man of great importance. He was a eunuch, a high-ranking official in charge of the entire treasury of the Candace, the Queen of Ethiopia. He was a man of power, wealth, and immense responsibility. He was also, significantly, a man of faith. He had made the long, arduous journey from his home in the heart of Africa all the way to Jerusalem to worship the God of Israel. His time in Jerusalem was now over, and he was heading home. As his chariot bumped along the dusty road, he was not idle. He was reading aloud from a scroll, his voice carrying in the quiet desert air. The scroll was from the prophet Isaiah. As Philip walked along the empty road, the Spirit of God whispered to him again with another specific instruction. Go to that chariot and stay near it. Philip broke into a run and caught up with the chariot. He could hear the words the official was reading. It was a passage both poignant and confusing, a prophecy about a suffering servant. He was led like a sheep to the slaughter, and as a lamb before its shearer is silent, so he did not open his mouth. In his humiliation he was deprived of justice. Who can speak of his descendants? For his life was taken from the earth. Do you understand what you are reading? Philip asked, stepping alongside the chariot. The official looked up from his scroll at the stranger who had seemingly appeared from nowhere. He was not annoyed by the interruption. Instead, his face showed a deep, honest yearning for truth. How can I, he replied with humility, unless someone explains it to me? He then invited Philip to come up and sit with him in the chariot, a remarkable gesture of welcome from a high court official to a dusty traveler on foot. Tell me, please, the eunuch asked as they rode along, who is the prophet talking about, himself or someone else? It was the perfect opening, an invitation prepared by God on a lonely road. Starting with that very passage from Isaiah, Philip began to explain. He told him the good news about Jesus. He connected the dots from the ancient prophecy of the suffering servant to the life, death, and resurrection of the Messiah. He explained how Jesus fulfilled that very passage, being led to his own death without protest, deprived of justice, yet providing salvation for all. The eunuch listened with rapt attention. The words of the prophet, which had been a mystery just moments before, now blazed with meaning. The abstract prophecy became a personal story of redemption. As they continued on their way, they came upon some water by the side of the road, perhaps an oasis or a small river. The official's heart was full. He understood and he wanted to belong to the story. He pointed to the water. Look, here is water, he said, turning to Philip. What is to stop me from being baptized? And so he commanded the chariot to stop. Philip and the eunuch went down together into the water, and Philip baptized him. The powerful treasurer for the Queen of Ethiopia was now a follower of Christ. When they came up out of the water, something miraculous happened. The Spirit of the Lord suddenly took Philip away. The eunuch looked around, and Philip was simply gone. His guide, the man who had appeared from nowhere, had vanished just as quickly. But the Ethiopian official was not distressed. His heart was filled with a profound joy. He had found the treasure he was seeking. He climbed back into his chariot and went on his way, rejoicing, carrying the good news of Jesus back with him to the heart of Africa. His encounter on a desert road would help carry the faith to a new continent, all because one man listened to a strange command, and another had the humility to ask for help. The wager in heaven. In the land of Uz, there lived a man named Job. He was, by every conceivable measure, a good man. The scriptures describe him as blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He was also exceptionally wealthy, the greatest man among all the people of the East. His holdings were vast: 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys, along with a great number of servants. His life was blessed, and his 7 sons and 3 daughters were a source of joy, feasting together in a close-knit family circle. Job's piety was not just for show. After his children's cycles of feasting, he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings for each of them, just in case they had sinned in their hearts. He was diligent in his devotion, a man who walked in integrity. One day in the celestial court, the angelic beings came to present themselves before the Lord. Among them came a figure known as the Satan. This was not a name, but a title, Ha-Satan, meaning the adversary or the accuser. His role was to roam the earth, observing humanity and challenging their loyalties. "Where have you come from?" the Lord asked him. "From roaming throughout the earth," the adversary answered, "going back and forth on it." "Have you considered my servant Job?" the Lord asked, his voice filled with a kind of divine pride. "There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." The adversary responded with a cynical, biting challenge. His entire purpose was to question the purity of human motivation. "Does Job fear God for nothing?" he sneered. "Have you not put a hedge of protection around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land." The accuser's point was sharp. Job's faith was a simple transaction. He was good because God was good to him. It was a fair-weather faith, bought and paid for with prosperity. "But now," the adversary wagered, "stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." A divine test was proposed. Is it possible for a human to love God for God's own sake, and not merely for the blessings he provides? The Lord accepted the challenge, confident in his servant. "Very well then," the Lord said to the adversary. "Everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger." With that permission, the accuser departed, and a storm of unimaginable tragedy was unleashed upon the unsuspecting Job. One day, while Job's sons and daughters were feasting at the eldest brother's house, a messenger, breathless and terrified, ran to Job. "The oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby," he gasped, "and the Sabaeans attacked and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." Before he had even finished speaking, another messenger arrived. "The fire of God fell from the heavens and burned up the sheep and the servants, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, a third messenger came. The Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on the camels and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. Job's entire fortune, the work of a lifetime, was wiped out in a matter of minutes. But the final blow, the one that would crush any parent's heart, was yet to fall. As the third messenger was delivering his terrible news, a fourth arrived, his face a mask of horror. Your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, he cried, when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the four corners of the house. It collapsed on them and they are dead, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. In a single, horrific afternoon, Job lost everything: his wealth, his livelihood, and all 10 of his children. Job stood up. He tore his robe in grief and shaved his head in mourning. Then, in an act of profound and incomprehensible faith, he fell to the ground not in rage, but in worship. "Naked I came from my mother's womb," he said, his voice trembling but clear, "and naked I will depart. The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." Through all of this, the scripture says, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. Back in the heavenly court, the angelic beings again gathered before the Lord, and the adversary came with them. "Have you considered my servant Job?" the Lord asked again. "He still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without any reason." "Skin for skin," the adversary retorted, refusing to concede. "A man will give all he has for his own life, but now stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face." The terms of the wager were escalated from Job's possessions to his own person. "Very well then," the Lord said. "He is in your hands, but you must spare his life." The adversary departed and afflicted Job with painful, festering sores from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. Job, once the greatest man in the East, now sat among the ashes, scraping his raw skin with a piece of broken pottery. He was a figure of complete and utter desolation. His own wife, seeing his misery, came to him. Her spirit was broken. "Are you still maintaining your integrity?" she cried. "Curse God and die." "You are talking like a foolish woman," Job replied, his voice heavy with sorrow but firm in his conviction. "Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" In all this, Job did not sin in what he said. He had lost everything. His body was racked with agonizing pain, and his last human companion had advised him to abandon his faith. Yet he held on, a lonely bastion of faithfulness in a world that had crumbled to dust around him. He did not know of the wager in heaven. He only knew his own suffering and the God he refused to curse. And it was here in the ashes that his true test was only just beginning. As 3 friends arrived from afar to comfort him, ready to explain the inexplicable.